Namaskar viewers, and I hope you're having a good quarantine time and making the best use out of it. And a lot of developments happen. But today we are going to focus on something which is very important to us because I think post-corona world will see a lot of challenges with people coping with uh, temporary depression about from the loss of job and what other things may happen, but there is always a positive side to it. So in this episode I'm going to focus on a particular type of meditation which uh, my guest will tell you more, and he has come on this channel many times, and he's going to explain that how those meditations can help you overcome the temporary setbacks. And I'm going to ask him a series of questions. And if you have any questions, you can always text me later on. This is a recorded video, it's not a live video. So you can always text and we can have him answer to you. So without keeping you waiting, I will introduce you to him. His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Maharaj. Hare Krishna and welcome, Bhakti.
Hare Krishna.
So it's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Adi Guru Prabhu.
It's so much pleasure.
Likewise to be on your show.
And it's the last feedback that we got from other videos was phenomenal. And I think that people comment to me, and I don't want to embarrass you, that there is something in your voice which soothes people down, which brings people more, makes people feel more secure. So we already discussed that the practice of meditation that you spoke last time. Today, one of the most popular figures of Sanatan Dharma, and even the Google confirms it or anyone confirms it, is Krishna. That the search on Krishna is still number one of the highest in the planet on Google. So what is that in the name that even people from Brazil, people from South America, in the US, when they talk about Vedic culture, they immediately get the first name comes here, Krishna, and then Ram. So what is that?
I think the first point is that Krishna is well known because of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is a famous text. Anyone who wants to understand spirituality, and in particular Eastern spirituality, and even more in particular Indian spirituality, will definitely want to know something about the Bhagavad Gita. And since Krishna is the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita, naturally, he also becomes very well known. Secondly, I think unique and very popular amongst Hindus because of the very fun-filled pastimes in which he engages himself and his devotees in various places, and particularly in Vrindavan. So I think the main issue is that nowhere else can we find such a conception of God where he acts in such a sweet way, in such an intimate way, performs such pastimes where there is no consideration of him being God, where he acts just like he wants to be, like an ordinary cowherd boy, and he frolics and has fun with his friends and the other residents of the village. So the of God as a prankster, as someone who's fun-loving, as someone who's quite unconventional when it comes to what people imagine about God, who is very down to earth, and he's a God who doesn't like to be God. So he likes to be a cowherd boy engaging in loving pastimes with his devotees. So these are some of the things that make Krishna really unique. So that is really why probably more and more people seek Krishna on the internet. And also in the last 50 years, thanks to His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness, the culture of devotion to Krishna has spread to all corners of the globe. And through ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada has made the world aware of who Krishna is and why he is so unique and important for everyone.
You are absolutely right. I think Prabhupada had one of the major contribution to this Krishna movement. And while answering your last question, you mentioned many important points, which I would like to go a little bit deeper into. And one of the things you said that Krishna doesn't want himself to be a god. And while I'm asking you this question is, the many communities, they have a impression that God is a very punishing person, and he wants to control everything. And now here we find the description of Krishna, what you described just now, where he doesn't want to be God. What do you mean by that?
It means that in being God, he has to act as a controller. He has to act as the proprietor. And when it comes to the material world, he has to see the entire material world is going on according to certain laws, and that people who are doing wrong get the suitable reactions from, so it's kind of an official function. It's a kind of a function where you're doing things because you have a position. It's not something very pleasing. Whereas when he's engaging in pastimes with his devotees, these are very informal, very loving, and full of the word, a Sanskrit word for that is rasa. Rasa means a certain kind of a nectar, a certain kind of a mellow, a certain sweetness that comes in those relationships. So, whilst people of this world in general have a conception of God as being the Almighty, the All-Powerful, the one who controls the universe, the one who acts as a punisher, and so on, and indeed, God is all of these things. But as I mentioned, that is his official aspect. Where the Bhagavad Gita and the devotional culture of the Vedic civilization is special is that both into this world an idea of God that goes far beyond this conception of awe and reverence in relation to God. The conception of Krishna as the absolute truth, as God, is a conception of extreme unlimited sweetness. And in the face of such sweetness, these pastimes become much more relishable than the pastime in which God, let us say, punishes the wrongdoers or enacts the tasks of creation, of maintenance and destruction of the universe, and so on. So I'll just give a little example that Srila Prabhupada used to cite, that there was once a prime minister of Great Britain. And as you know, at one point, roughly 70, 80 or 100 years ago, there was a saying that the sun never set on the British Empire because the British controlled such a large portion of the world. Of such a country naturally is very, very powerful. Now, one time he had a guest who came to see him, and somehow the secretary told the guest that the prime minister was busy. So the guest waited for some time, and as time went by, the guest became more and more impatient, and finally, because he knew the prime minister well, he just walked into the office. And when he opened the door, he saw something very, very surprising. He saw that the prime minister was on his hands and knees on the floor, and his little grandson was sitting on his back and riding piggyback and driving him as if the prime minister were a horse. And the grandson was riding the horse. And the prime minister was relishing this very much. So Srila Prabhupada gave this example to illustrate the point that even though here is a man who is the most powerful man in the whole world, but still he prefers the sweetness of engaging in little activities as this with his grandson, where he acts as a subordinate, where he serves his grandson rather than being a lord. So, similarly, God finds greater pleasure in engaging in pastimes with his devotees where he takes a subordinate position.
No, this is a
And
very. Mhm.
so there are two words here that I would like to introduce. One is the ontological understanding of God, the ontology. And the second is the lila or the rasa. Lila means a pastime, rasa means the sweetness of the mellow. So ontologically, Krishna is the Supreme Lord. He is the creator, maintainer, destroyer. He is the one because of whom the entire creation works. The law of karma is under him. All the laws function because of him. He's the origin of everything, etc., etc. So all that is true. And certainly that is also a lila. That is also a pastime of Lord Krishna. Nevertheless, there are other pastimes where Krishna does not act as God. He acts only as an ordinary cowherd boy, and he becomes subordinate to the love of his devotees. And indeed, he acts controlled by his devotees. And he acts just like an ordinary boy. And sometimes his mother would reprimand him or scold him. Sometimes she would tie him to punish him. His friends, whilst playing with him, would threaten him that they wouldn't allow him to play next time if he went home early. The gopis, the young cowherd maidens of Vrindavan, would also tease him and rebuke him. And Lord Krishna would love these rebukes and these threats and this punishment and so on because it was done with intense love. And there was that punishment and that rebuke and that fun was imbued with a certain sweetness of love that he wants to relish. So these things are not there when God is worshipped in a spirit of awe and reverence as the Almighty, as the Supreme Controller, and so on. So this is the distinction between the ontological understanding of God and the rasa understanding of God. So generally, people have this ontological understanding of God, but the rasa understanding of God is pretty much unknown, except in the Vedic civilization, and more particularly when it comes to Krishna. That is why he's so special.
You touched so many points, and I think viewers will love this. So when you mentioned the word Bhagavad Gita, and while most of the Indians may know, or Hindus from South Asia or Hindus from other world may know Bhagavad Gita as one of the principal books of the spiritual knowledge, most of the Western people may not relate to it. So the Bhagavad Gita is, just for everyone's clarification, is a book similar to their own religious scriptures, and it is a principal book. Should we call it of Hindus or for the entire society?
It's for the whole society. It's for the whole world. The Bhagavad Gita is not a sectarian book that is meant for only a certain community. It's meant for everyone.
Yeah, it's meant for everyone. Now, there is one in the last point. I was making some notes on the things that you said just now. Now, you gave a very good explanation about the pastimes, which is the activities of Krishna on this earth, and also the ontological understanding of Krishna. Now, when we hear, mostly we hear a logic that we hear. How can God be a person? And this comes from mostly the people with the background who have not experienced Bhagavad Gita. So how do you explain to them that God is a person?
Behind everything there is a person. Let's take some simple examples. Let's say you use the word government. And in our everyday conversation, we use expressions like the government did this or did that. Now, when we say the government did this, it's a kind of an impersonal expression. But behind that impersonal word government, there are people, there are individuals, there are ministers, there's a president, there are secretaries, there are bureaucrats, and there's a whole range of officers, who are actually doing the work of governance. So, whenever there is anything that's impersonal, behind it, there is a person. So, a person is one who controls. Controllership is ultimately done by a person. For example, Srila Prabhupada also gave the example of a power station. A power station generates a lot of power. And we may think that the electricity is coming from the power station. Indeed, it is. But the person who's actually making that happen is the engineer who's controlling the power station.
Absolutely.
So behind the impersonal thing called the power station, there is a controller of that power station, the engineer, those people who designed it, those who are maintaining it, etc. So in this way, ultimately, behind everything, there is a person. Let's also look at it from the point of view of the laws of nature. Every law has to have a lawmaker. When you drive on the streets and there is a signal there, red, yellow, and green, and it has a meaning, and someone has installed those lights there, and there is a meaning to it that is supposed to be known by everybody who's driving. And in case someone skips that light, then that person is probably reprimanded in some way. So this entire law, the traffic laws, they may seem to be impersonal, especially nowadays when everything goes on by technology. Even if you skip a traffic signal or you overspeed, you get a ticket at home. There may not be any policeman in sight, but there are cameras and there is so much technology there. So someone may think, well, there is, it's just happening. There's no person involved here. But for a person who has knowledge, he or she understands that behind this technology, behind this impersonal facade of technology, there are people who are managing everything.
Yes.
Similarly, behind the laws of nature, the law of gravity, all the innumerable laws that we have, there is a lawmaker. There is a supreme intelligence who must be a person. So the topic is big. I'm just giving you a few points of simple logic without getting too philosophical to establish that understanding God as a person is just the natural and logical thing to do.
There's one thing you mentioned, ontological. Now coming back to Bhagavad Gita, because I think most of the people are rather uninformed that Hindus have no scriptures. And that's mostly a propaganda, where we see Bhagavad Gita, the word has been quoted by big scientists, American scientists and American philosophers, and Mark Twain, Henry Thoreau, many people have spoken about it. And it has been a big source of inspiration. Now, what sort of inspiration did they derive from Bhagavad Gita about Krishna? If you can a little bit speak on that?
Your voice got cut off a little bit for maybe about 10 seconds. And I what you said. Who was the they referring to?
So there are American philosophers like Mark Twain, Henry David Thoreau, and
okay.
And what is the inspiration that they derive? Because you mentioned that it's an ontological explanation about Krishna, and so what sort of inspiration did they derive from Bhagavad Gita?
Yeah. Well, because the world was freezing, so I don't know if you're hearing me.
Yeah, now please give me an answer. Yes, now. Yes.
Okay. So perhaps in those days, people were not as materialistic as they are today. People were more godly. There was more religious culture, you know, and so they understood the value of godliness and spirituality and spiritual texts. And even in those days, a century or two ago, people understood that India was a land of spirituality.
Mhm.
So obviously, those who were more knowledgeable, more educated, they had heard of India as a place of spiritual culture, and therefore they had heard of Bhagavad Gita. And many of them, like Mark Twain and Oppenheimer famously, the physicist famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita when he witnessed the first atomic bomb testing in America. So they all used to read, or at least had some acquaintance with the Bhagavad Gita, many of them, because they had heard of it as a text of great spiritual wisdom. So I think that goes to show that the glory of the Bhagavad Gita was understood by educated and intelligent people all over the world, even at that time.
So there are many topics. eh, So there are many topics on Bhagavad Gita, in Bhagavad Gita, on and and some of the most popular words in North America are karma, yoga, and I think the one is increasingly becoming popular in the occult spiritualism category is reincarnation in a big way. And I think the credit always goes to many people who have come from India, but especially goes to Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON. So so those topics have literally is in the regular American lexicon. So the people speak about it, openly talk about it, and that has become the representative of what it is in Bhagavad Gita. But there is one controversial topic where people attack Bhagavad Gita, and I'm sure I have written two books on Gita, and there's a Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. Now that is a caste system, and you and I and people who are students of Bhagavad Gita know that the word caste is not there in the Bhagavad Gita. So would you like to elucidate on that topic a little bit, so that we can remove those misconceptions coming to Krishna meditation on that?
Well, the word used in the Bhagavad Gita is Varna and not Jati. Jati is your community of birth, that is caste. But Varna is something different. So the Varna system, as explained by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, is not based on birth. It is based on qualification. So he says in the Bhagavad Gita, Chatur Varne Maya Srishtam Guna Karma Vibhagashaha. So there's a verse in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says that I have established varnas, four varnas, which is based on guna and karma. Guna means qualities and karma means activities. So based on one's activities and one's qualities, one is understood to belong to one of those four groups. So it's not something that is to be seen from the point of view of birth. For example, the child of a doctor may not become a doctor. Just because someone has a doctor as a parent, it doesn't mean that automatically he or she becomes a doctor. That person will still have to go to medical school, graduate, and only then become a doctor. So similarly, one does of whatever so-called caste, Varna, actually, unless one has the qualities for that, unless one acts according to what is expected of a person belonging to that Varna. So there is a great misunderstanding that Bhagavad Gita promotes this kind of birth-based caste system. And that is not the case. What the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic civilization talk about is about qualification-based Varna system. It's a very logical division of the human society. There are some who are intellectuals and teachers. There are some who are administrators and military people. There are some who are businessmen, mercantile people. There are some who are, let's say, who do labor, who are skilled, who are artisans, who are, do so many other such functions. So there's no question of a lack of dignity in any of these four. But the point is that one is known to be one of these four categories according to the qualification. It doesn't matter which kind of family one has been born in.
People who have read Bhagavad Gita, they speak a lot about the yoga and the meditation to a large extent. So, according to you, what is the highest yoga which you recommend, because you have been practicing this for a very long time? So, what is that you recommend?
I will recommend what Lord Krishna recommends in the Bhagavad Gita and what Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, recommends, which is Bhakti-yoga. Yoga is ultimately like one ladder, and the different types of yoga, whether it's karma yoga, jnana yoga, hatha yoga, ashtanga yoga, they're all rungs in that ladder. And the purpose of the ladder ultimately is to reach God, to reach Krishna. So one can go step by step up that ladder, then come to Bhakti Yoga, and then reach Krishna or God. Or one can take to the Bhakti Yoga process directly and bypass the other stages of Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, and all of that. So Bhakti Yoga is the process and also the goal.
Coming back to this, so throughout the world, there is a deep respect, especially in the coronavirus, which is a pandemic which is going on. People are appreciating a lot of things from the Vedic culture. And the Namaste has become a big cultural respect for India, Namaste, and folding the palms. And that is becoming very common in America as well, in many places. Especially in UK, it is becoming more popular now. Another aspect which has really brought attention to the people is, to the world, or the people of the world, is that how cooperatively every citizen of India cooperated with the government of India and helped in that. Do you think that that particular strength of the Indian society comes from Bhagavad Gita?
Well, it's not that there's 100% compliance. There were a lot of people who, from all communities, who did flout the lockdown rules, and many who were quite flippant about the whole thing, deliberately. Very good. And considering the kind of population that is we have in India, 1.3 billion, it is quite exceptional. So that's the fact. Now, why has this happened? Number one, I guess the state has been also pretty vigilant about enforcing the lockdown and has taken steps, sometimes physically also, to ensure that people are restrained from coming out. But also perhaps there is an underlying idea that we must be responsible citizens and that we must, for our own good and for the good of others around us, pay heed uh, to this very sensible instruction that we're receiving from the government and from all the medical people and people who should know what's good for us. So, because there is that culture of respecting authority, of understanding, that's still very much there in Indian culture. So people have very much taken to this process. What I have found is that in many other countries, perhaps the culture of independence, is very individual independence and individual freedoms are so strong that it is very hard for any government to restrain people till the situation becomes very, very grave. So probably the kind of culture and the mindset of people has also, in addition to other factors, contributed to a higher degree of compliance with the
Yeah,
lockdown requirements.
yeah, if you compare China's response to coronavirus control and India's response to coronavirus control, there is a vast difference. They use artificial intelligence to enforce compliance and literally tracked every single citizen in China. And the India's response has been mostly emotional, mass appeal, and the way Indians came forward together. And that is a very good example for the world to see, and also a good example of the Vedic culture, or sort of Vedic culture. Before I leave, my last question to you on this series, and I'm going to a little bit ask you more questions in the next interview about the doer, because that's the biggest confusing factor, the doer. Who is the doer? And but on this one, the last one is, do you think that the karma decides your next life?
Yes, uh, the karma that we have done in previous lives has shaped who we are today, where we were born, our physical, intellectual, mental situation. And nothing happens without a cause. So, similarly, what we do in this life will also determine what we will be in the lives to come. So, definitely, our next birth is going to be decided by our activities in this life. And also, if there is some impact, there may be some impact from lives previous to this one as well.
So thank you, Swamiji, for finishing up with a most important question. And for viewers, please continue watching, subscribe to this channel, and watch this video live on Thursday. And if you have any questions or comments, you can comment on the video, or you can send it directly to me. And so, Swamiji, very welcome. Namaste.
Thank you very much,
Hare Krishna.
Adi Guru Prabhu, Aditya. It's a pleasure being on your channel, and my best wishes